Hello and welcome to the Charles Cole Zoom Room. I'm your media host, Mark McIntyre. After Charles Cole defeated 6 established career Democrats, including Santa Barbara Mayor Cathy Murillo and long-serving Ventura County Supervisor Steve Bennett, to win the March 3rd primary election for the 37th California Assembly District seat, Charles took his campaign online even before this pandemic shutdown. Charles won the primary because he listens before he speaks. That's exactly what the Cole Zoom Room is all about. It's a place where voters and Charles can have real conversations and listen to real practical experts on matters of concern to all the voters in the district. Today is no exception. Charles Cole has as his special guest Dr. Paul Aijian. And together they drill down into the political as well as the medical assumptions of the coronavirus pandemic, which now grips the globe. Dr. Paul Aijian is an internist in Santa Barbara, California, and he's affiliated with multiple hospitals in the area. He has been in practice for more than 20 years. General internal medicine physicians, or internists as they are known, are primary care doctors who perform physical exams and treat a wide spectrum of common illnesses in adult men and women. Things like the common cold, the flu, and viruses. Dr. Aijian is affiliated with both the Santa Barbara and the Goleta Cottage hospitals. So now, join me as we join the conversation already in progress between Charles Cole and Dr. Paul Aijian. Enjoy.
Using American tax dollars, sending millions of dollars to the people who are doing the research. And if it was just a big oops and somebody dropped a test tube somewhere and infected one of the people who then spread it in that area, the whole thing is so muddled and so conflicted with who was funding what and who did what. And you mix that with the Chinese attempt to hide the whole thing, that I think the truth may be about as unlikely as finding Jimmy Hoffa's body.
I am interested on that subject. Why didn't we just, if all that was true or is true, why didn't we just study the virus here?
Well,
why send it to China?
Studying the virus here, but the Chinese would not let Americans from the CDC go over there immediately. And theoretically, and a lot of what I know is just from watching the news, but theoretically they say that they went in and bleached down the entire lab, and the people who reported it, the Chinese doctors who initially reported it, either disappeared or are dead. And so there's, between disinfected and disinformation, it's very hard. And so it took a while for a lab to get an actual sample of enough of the viruses that were not from China, but were actually taken from people who got the disease. And then that allowed them to analyze the DNA of the virus. But the question that is still not clear, and this goes back to the secrecy of it, is whether it was actually a naturally occurring variety of the virus that just made the jump from bats to humans, or whether it was genetically engineered to be even more infectious, because that's the $64 question is, was it a bioweapon or was it just an oops?
Right. Yeah. Seriously, that is the main question at this point. I guess another one is the one-size-fits-all government quarantine, lockdown, stay-at-home regulation. Any of those, are they publicly rational?
Well, that's something that there's just a huge raging debate going on, and all you have to do is turn on social media or the news, and you get opinions that vary enormously. I mean, there's a woman being put in jail as we speak in Texas because she didn't obey the lockdown and opened up her hair salon. And yet there are people marching in the streets of Orange County and in Santa Barbara saying that it's nonsense and they should end the lockdown. So, and that's just the public response, but even the science of it, people who seem to be reasonably entitled to an opinion say totally different things. There's a doctor from Stanford named Dr. Atlas, and he's a very credentialed and smart guy. He's one of the head of the department at Stanford, and he basically said that he thinks that the whole idea of isolating the entire population was a big mistake. And if you haven't read anything by him, just look up the name Dr. Atlas and read what he has said. And there's another doctor whose name I've forgotten, another one from Stanford. He's Greek. His last name ends in IS. But he came out and he basically said that this lockdown had been a big mistake and it was doing more. The disease was much more prevalent than the early models suggested. And the reason that that's important is because you can't come up with a death rate if you don't know how widespread the disease is in the community. And if the only people that are used in the calculation are the people who are super sick and end up in the hospital, you create an artificially elevated rate that makes it look a lot worse than it is. And unfortunately, ever since this whole thing came out, the modeling and the information has been totally inadequate. And it appears that a heck of a lot more people have had the disease that ever even knew they had it, particularly young people. They may have got a cold, they may have thought they had an allergy, or they may have had no symptoms at all. But they actually have evidence that they had the disease in the last 6 months, and they need to be put into the denominator to come up with a correct rate. And I've been saying for months that we lack a denominator, and all of these decisions are made on information which is mathematically suspect. And as far as the politicization of it goes, I really think that the Democrats and the media firmly believe in what Rahm Emanuel said, and that is never waste a crisis. And when they couldn't take Trump out with Russiagate or Ukraine or Stormy Daniels or all the other stuff they threw at him, the one thing they could do is try and prolong or politicize the crash of the economy, which wasn't his fault. But that seems to be what they're doing.
Right, yeah. And just going off of the shutdown, do you think it's right for the governments who shut the economy down, force people not to work, to keep their government jobs and go to work and get paid for them when everyone else is stuck at home, not getting a paycheck, living day by day, not able to buy food for their families? What do you think on that?
Well, I think it's ironic that the people who are making the decisions are not suffering the consequences of their own decisions. But that's typical of government. You know, the politicians who voted in Obamacare would never be on Obamacare. And there was a great article that I put on Facebook this morning about this British researcher whose information was the basis for a lot of the early suggestion for locking everybody down. And this very man was having an affair with some other man's wife while he actually had the disease. And yet he's out there pontificating about why the British people should stay home and not go to work. and the hypocrisy is just breathtaking. The other one is the Cuomo on one of the fake news media. I forget whether it's MSNBC or CNN.
CNN.
But that guy is home in his basement. He actually has the disease, and he's telling everybody on some little video they all need to stay home, and he's out driving around checking out his property. He gets stopped by some guy who calls him on it, and Cuomo calls the guy a jackass in public, and the hypocrisy and double standard is just unbelievable, and it's really ridiculous, but that's what's going on. So that there are two issues. There's the debate about the science of it. Actually, three issues. There's the scientific debate about what the numbers actually mean. There's the debate on the media of people who are trying to destroy Trump and use this for their own purposes. And then probably the most interesting part of it, and I don't know if we'll ever know, and that goes back to whether something nefarious was going on between our government giving money to the Chinese lab to do this research in the first place. And I think that's where we'll probably never know the answer to that, because I think there's probably a lot of people who would be in enormous trouble if the truth came out. But that's just a conspiracy theory.
Right. Do you think the virus in this pandemic will always have a political asterisk right next to it because of all the things that have happened during this time?
Absolutely. The whole thing has been weaponized for political purposes, and it's too bad because, I mean, it is really a bad virus, and you get it, and people are dying every day. And I think that trying to keep people who are at high risk from being exposed to it does make sense. I see people every day in my office who are over 80 years old who have diabetes and impaired immune systems, and I say, look, if I were you, I would not go to the market. I would not go to Home Depot. And if you do go out in public, you ought to wear a mask and take hand sanitizer and be very cautious, because these people, if they get this disease, they're very likely not to survive it. But you're right. It is so politicized that it's like, it's one thing if you're lost in the woods, but it's another thing if you're lost in the woods in the middle of a blizzard. And unfortunately, the blizzard is all the political and that kind of stuff that's going on, along with the fact that we're trying to sort out what to do with this new virus.
Right. Would you say the CDC is also part of that politicization, and why it took so long for them to actually say you should wear a mask in public? You should, if you're worried about getting sick, you should distance yourself. Do you think that has something to do with why the CDC took so long in doing that?
I don't think that it's likely that the scientists at the CDC made their decisions based on anything as that political. I think they just didn't know. And what they said changed so much over time. It's mind-boggling that one day the Surgeon General is standing there with his uniform saying, don't wear masks, they'll make you worse. And then 2 weeks later, they're talking about rules passed saying that if you don't have a mask, you could be arrested. So there has just been this incredibly rapid change of what the official statement that's coming from government is. But I think the CDC probably has elements in it that are political. You know, I'm sure, I believe in the principle of the deep state, and I think that there are people there who don't think they're answerable to the voters or to Trump, and they really think they're in charge. They're the same people who tried to get this Russia hoax to take Trump out. And so I believe there's got to be people in every branch of government that are there, and they are basing some of their decisions on their ideology and not on the science. But I think the rapidly changing and conflicting opinions are more based on ignorance than ideology, at least from the CDC.
Right. And just your personal view on the virus, is it as bad as everyone says it is? Should we continue the social distancing for certain groups? Should we keep the economy closed, or should we open it right away? Just general opinions on this.
Questions. I think that the virus in certain people can be fatal, and nothing worse than fatal. But the cases that I have seen, the people were sick. They got a bad cough. One man lost his sense of smell, which is almost the hallmark of the disease. If you get a bad cough and fevers and chills and sweats, and you get up in the morning and you can't smell your coffee, you should figure you have coronavirus regardless of what your test shows. And but both of these people, they were sick, but they stayed home, and I didn't give them any medicine. And at the time, I would have given them hydroxychloroquine, but it was totally unavailable. And as far as staying home goes, I think that you have to look at the economic consequences and the social consequences. And I think throwing the country into a Great Depression to save a few lives is, it may sound crass to say that some people will die if we open up the economy, but we haven't done this for the flu, and we haven't done this for a lot of other reasons. And I think if you were to balance the positives and the negatives, doing what we've been doing for the last month can't go on. I put an article on Facebook where the emergency room doctors are pointing out that the emergency rooms are half empty because people are staying home with heart attacks and strokes, and they're not getting their surgery. And so, you know, the whole idea of staying home was originally to, quote, flatten the curve. What that meant was not swamping the ICUs and the ventilator capacity with people with respiratory failure. And we haven't changed the number of people, I don't think, who are ultimately going to get the disease. All we've done is dampen the magnitude of the wave coming through. But at this point, it can't go on forever. And there's a big debate about what's going on in Sweden, and they're talking about herd immunity.
Right.
I think one thing is young children don't seem to get sick. And if they open the schools and the children got an asymptomatic case of the disease, and they segregate frail grandma and grandpa from being around the kids, that's how you're going to get herd immunity. And the herd immunity is ultimately a much more likely answer to the problem than waiting for a vaccine. And the only drug that the FDA has been very enthusiastic about was remdesivir the other day, which I think costs about $4,000 for a course of therapy.
Oof.
And they're only using it in people who are deathly sick. And the debate about hydroxychloroquine has kind of disappeared into the background, but that's another example of the politicization of it, because Trump said it seemed like something worth trying. And I have jokingly said that if somebody was talking about how to put out a fire and Trump suggested using water, people would say he was an idiot for putting water on fire, and they wouldn't do it simply because Trump suggested it. And it's just an example of the insanity that is going on about this particular virus. And I just think it's a sad comment on the hyper political world that we live in.
Right. Yeah. And just one last question. What is your view on the vaccine for the virus? Will that be effective, or will herd immunity or just letting it pass be more effective?
Here's the thing on vaccines. Everybody that knows what they're talking about has never seen a vaccine come to public use in less than 2 years. And even with the Manhattan Project approach to vaccines, the question that a reasonable person might ask is, do I want to be in the first million people that get this whiz-bang vaccine? There was a vaccine that was invented for the swine flu, if you go back and look it up. And I still see people who got something called Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a form of paralysis that you can end up on a ventilator or die. And it was a consequence of that vaccine that was invented for that viral disease. And so they may very well come up with a vaccine pretty soon, but I would be a little bit hesitant to recommend to people that they be in the first group to take it. And I think that by the time they finally release a vaccine, which is not likely until the beginning of next year at the absolute earliest, the virus is going to have spread throughout the world so massively that it'll be very interesting to see who ought to actually get the vaccine. And you probably shouldn't get the vaccine unless you know that you have no antibodies to the virus. And even then, it's a decision you're going to have to make personally. And the other thing about vaccines is that, you probably know this, but there's a whole culture of people who think that vaccines are an evil plot between Bill Gates and Fauci and whoever else, Dr. Evil, to take control of the whole world. And so you have this massive anti-vaccine culture out there too. So there are going to be lots of people who won't take the vaccine no matter what. And so it's not as simple as just saying we came up with this wonderful pill, take 2 pills a day for the next week and you're great. If anything might be that, it would be chloroquine, or hydroxychloroquine. And as far as I'm concerned, I said this as recently as a couple days ago, that if I thought I had the coronavirus, I would still take hydroxychloroquine for a week, along with Zithromax. And this is not about a vaccine, but if you look at the articles by these doctors who have given it to lots of their patients, it seems that the key is treating them early and not waiting till they're at death's door. And so that's on the subject of therapy.
Excellent. Yeah. Perfect. Mark, any questions you would like to throw in there?
Well, this is so far out of my area of expertise that I don't dare make a comment now. But I just want to thank Dr. Aijian for taking the time to be very informative and very balanced with his particular. Yes, what's up, Charles?
Back to the vaccinations. I know this is a bit off topic, but I was reading on a few things, and I was going over governmental policy going through, and they're trying to make it force vaccinations in schools for everybody, even if the parents don't want them. What's your view on that?
Well, that's a very good question. And I think that one of the big issues that we're looking at is loss of personal freedom to gain a certain degree of safety or treating the fear. And I think the big issue that you need to think about as a person in the political world and me in the scientific world is are people using this as a way to achieve governmental takeover of our lives? And that's really the big question. And the thing I find breathtaking about all of this is the equanimity with which people become like sheep. And if somebody like Anthony Fauci and Deborah Birx get on TV and say, we're experts, do what we say, and then if you argue with them, they just say, shut up and be a good citizen, it's scary, because when I get on the freeway, I see one of those big signs that they park on the side of the on-ramp trying to tell you that the freeway is closed for the next 5 miles. Instead, it says, be a good citizen and stay home. And so if anybody says that they have any skepticism about all of this, or they think it's counterproductive, they make you look like an antisocial, knuckle-dragging Neanderthal. And the problem with vaccinating everybody and forcing vaccines in school, my own daughter-in-law is part of the group that is totally anti-vaccine. And there's a big debate about whether vaccines cause autism. And that subject is nuclear. And if you want to have a hot discussion, just ask a random 10 mothers of young children what they think about it. And your willingness to let the government tell you you should vaccinate your children is somewhat of a reflection of your willingness to let the government tell you to do just about anything. And I keep thinking about all the people in Europe who were marched off to the camps by the Germans because they were scared, and the last thing that happened before they went to the gas chambers is there was a doctor standing on the loading by the rail cars wearing a white coat and a stethoscope. And the reason they had doctors out there was to try and make people pacified. And the doctors were saying, we're going to take care of you. You just need to get a shower because you could have some disease. So it sounds really paranoid perhaps, but I think that people can use medicine as a means of social control and achieving political goals. And I would not argue with a mother or father who say we don't want our kids vaccinated. But unfortunately, in the state of California and most of the country, actually, you cannot put your kids in school unless you supply this report that's like 20 vaccines. It's really crazy. I was born in 1950, and all I got was the polio vaccine and a smallpox vaccine and a tetanus shot. And now my grandchildren have to have about 50 vaccines. There's the phone pole going overhead if you hear this noise in the background.
Yeah.
But anyway, the issue of vaccines is extremely political, polarizing, and likely to create, if it gets to the point that they invent a vaccine for coronavirus and they tell everybody in America that you can't send your kids to school unless you have this vaccine, I think 90% of the people will say, okay, give them the vaccine. There's going to be a significant number of people who will revolt, and it's kind of a hair-raising thought.
Well, one of the reasons why Dr. Aijian is so well respected in the community is because of the fact that he treats the body and the soul. It reminds me of the young Marine in Sacramento who faced a phalanx of armed riot police officers trying to defend the State House from being overrun. And this young Marine reminded the police officers, do not sacrifice your soul in order to keep your job. And he harangued them. He harangued them for about 20 minutes. And guess what? It got through. The police turned around and they walked back into the State House, and there was no confrontation. So I think what Dr. Aijian is saying, the reason I like him as a doctor is because he recognizes we have a soul as well as a body, and we have to take care of both of them.
Yeah.
The only other thing are you still there?
Oh yeah, we're here.
Oh yeah.
The other thing I was going to say is we haven't talked, this is not the medical aspect of it, but I think it's pretty chilling that they've shut down the churches, and I think most of the people who are using these governmental experts to impose all of this, I'll never forget the thing I saw on TV where they were interviewing the governor of New Jersey. And I think Tucker Carlson asked him if he had read the Bill of Rights, and he said
No.
he really hadn't thought about it. And I think that the people that are doing all of this are acting as if the Bill of Rights doesn't exist. And one manifestation of it is saying that you cannot go to church. And I think the church, there are two groups that are likely to revolt more than anybody else in society. And one is people who truly want to have the ability to go to church. And the other ones are the people who are anti-vaccine. Those are two very passionate groups of people. And if you want to know who's likely to be the group leading the fight against all of this, they are two of them.
I agreed. And I want to thank Dr. Aijian for standing on a mountaintop and really shouting out some information that is very valuable. The reason he's on the mountaintop is because the Southern California Edison has cut off his power. So he can't actually join us by Zoom on his PC. He's actually using both an iPad and a phone. So thank you, Dr. Aijian.
All right.
Thank you so much for the information. We'll send this on to you. And I'll throw it back to you, Charles.
Yeah, I just wanted to, again, thank you for coming on here and talking with me, giving me some more information that I wouldn't have had otherwise. It's always good to have more than one source of information. So they have Dr. Fauci. Now I'm also hearing from you what you think, and I would love to talk more in the future on either this subject or other subjects that come up.
What I was going to say, Charles, is if you go on Facebook and you friend request me, I put something up every day about it, usually several things, and a lot of it is tongue-in-cheek, but I mean, I do try and educate people about what I think is the latest information on this, and a lot of the things that I was referring to in this discussion have some links that are as recent as today. So
Right.
I kind of try and curate for people who follow me on Facebook what I think is worth reading about it, and that's another source of what I think.
Yeah. Well, we also invite as many people on Facebook as possible. If you want really a practical medical view on the goings-on, friend Dr. Aijian and read his postings on a daily basis. I'm on there with Facebook, and I certainly follow his column. Some of it is tongue-in-cheek, but that's the fun of Facebook. That's the fun of Facebook. Anyway.
All right. Good. I'm going to sign off unless there's something else I can
no, I think you've covered it. I think you've covered it pretty well, and we'll send this file on to you so that you can circulate it yourself. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, Doc. Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Charles, that was great. And friends, fans, don't forget to visit coalforassembly.com, and read all of the issues that Charles Cole is conversant on. This is just the beginning of the in the Zoom room with Charles Cole. We're going to be taking issues and having guests like Dr. Aijian. Of course, there's really nobody like Dr. Aijian. He's in a class by himself. But I mean, you know what I mean? Practical experts in real estate, in development, land development, ranches, farmers, all that sort of stuff. This is the first in the series, so please join us and look for us. And Charles will be talking later. And
don't forget, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Coal for Assembly on all three, and Facebook.
All right.